So today we're cycling EV1 from Glenbeigh over to Inch Beach, that's Inch there, and this is the route we're taking. So as you'll see, as the crow flies, it's probably only about 10 kilometres from start to finish, but it's a little over 50 kilometres. It's not the most interesting part of this EV route. Any of the top of the peninsulas you're on busier roads, but that said, it's a reasonably good selection of dodging the more busy roads. The hotel there is where you can get breakfast if you want it. Glenbeigh is the site of a big IRA ambush in 1921 when units came over from the Dingle Peninsula, met up with locals and robbed an armed shipment on the train going out, getting a Lewis machine gun, 3,000 rounds of ammunition and about 14 rifles. So here's a detour. You could turn it off to the right here and this would take you all the way back to Killarney. It will also take you to Carriglake. So if you go back through my video archives, you'll know the first ever big trip I ever did was coming out of Killarney, and I wild camped at Carriglake here overnight. Lovely little spot. There's a public access area down to the lake as you're on the north side of it. It's a short laneway coming off the road, and it's a fantastic lake actually. You could use that turning if you wanted to do a loop from Killarney, do the route I've done over the last couple of days and then return to Killarney. Just take that turn off and you'll have pretty much quiet roads all the way. But we are heading now to Killorgan via a turn off that brings you down by Duke's Golf Course. This is where the Dingle Peninsula IRA landed back in 1921. And as we're coming up here, there's another story actually, which is very relevant, which is in 1916. So 1916 rebellion, it's normally seen as blood sacrifice, you know, that they knew they didn't have a prayer. But in fact, the planning for it was quite elaborate. And one of the things that could have made a huge difference was if they had successfully landed about 10,000 German rifles on a boat called the Ard. That's the boat Roger Casement was involved in bringing over. So there was a tragedy here where four IRA men were driving down to get to Valentia to send a signal to the Ard. However, they took a wrong turn, not here, but it's the next one I've marked up, and because of that wrong turn, it was a moonlit night, they were driving down, the driver thought there was a bridge ahead of them, but in fact what it was a pier, and they went off the end of the pier, and 3 of the 4 of them drowned, the one apart from the driver. Now, it mightn't have made any difference, because apparently the Arch didn't have a wireless on it. They were planning to signal to Casement on the shore using flashing lights. So even if they had got through, perhaps it wouldn't have made any difference in the rebellion. But I think if you're interested in that whole 1916 period, it's a very interesting counter story to the traditional way it's taught, which is they knew all along they were doomed and they were just engaging in this as an example. That's definitely true of the morning itself. Certainly of the leadership. They knew that there wasn't much chance because the guns hadn't come through. But like a lot of the other Irish rebellions, if all the pieces had fallen into place, then you'd probably have seen something very much larger and more successful than what you actually saw on the day. Yes, here it is. So you go left there and there's a memorial down at Ballykissane that leads it. Now, the next place we're coming to here is Killorgan. Killorgan is very famous for one thing in particular, and that is Puck Fair. So Puck Fair is a street market, street fair, horse fair, that is again linked to the lunacy celebrations that happen around this time of year. So that's kind of pre-Christian, going back to the Bronze Age, very possibly going right back to the Neolithic, in fact, in many places around Ireland. And the thing that's best known of these is the ascent of spiky mountains, for lack of a better word, mountains that come to a little peak. I pointed out 2 of those on the road as we came up yesterday. Bandon, which we will see in a couple of days, is the 3rd one of those, and of course Croagh Patrick is the most famous. But Puck Fair is also related to this tradition, being held at the end of all these things at the end of July, the start of August. They're called different things in different parts of the country. So Week Sunday is obviously the Croagh Patrick one, Blueberry Fair, Lammas Fair, I think, in the north, up around Ballykissane. There's a range of names, but there's a great book, somebody's PhD thesis originally by Maura But she did a study of these and discovered that I think at the turn of the 20th century there was something like 175 of them still in existence in Ireland. There's still actually probably a couple of dozen, although they have faded out, in particular in the last 50 years. But there does seem to be the re-establishment of some as well. So interesting tradition in terms of it going so far back and being continued and often being Christianized, but not always Christianized. In some places it's more of a secular matchmaking celebration type thing, with the idea is you send all the young men and women up the top of the mountains with a picnic basket. You'll find a link to my route map down in the description. I use Cycle Travel for these routes and recommend it. So this bit of it is kind of the nicest bit of the cycle in terms of traffic and roads of the day, and that's because I've swung off the N70 and doing a loop east of that that's going to take us into Milltown. One of the unfortunate things about the top of the peninsulas is the roads get quite busy. There's a lot of traffic on them, and you'll see that as we head down from Castlemaine towards Inch in particular. But at least for this particular stretch, it's pleasant enough as we're reaching Milltown. So this area is east of, north and east, I guess, of Castlemaine Harbour. We're doing a big loop around that. That's an area of special scientific interest or conservation, because lots and lots of birds go there for winter feeding grounds. It's got one of the biggest salt marsh grass areas in the whole country. And Milltown itself was a planned town built in the 1750s. We're just going through it here. On a vast estate that had initially been assembled as part of the Tudor Conquests in Ireland. So a little bit of the local history. Basically, the Norman Conquest happens, and this area we're cycling through now is the most southerly end of the Norman Conquest, with a castle here at Castlemaine. I stopped here just at the pub that's coming up for lunch, the Griffin Bar. You can also take a shortcut through the back of the pub and miss the corner you have to otherwise take, but this takes us on to the regional road that's going to bring us down to Inch. Anyway, back to that bit of local history. So Norman Conquest, they build a castle there at Castlemaine. They also build an abbey there locally, and that parcel of land changes hands when the abbey is dissolved, and it's handed over to a guy called Thomas Spring. This is during the Tudor Conquest. He's given about 6,000 acres as part of the plantation of Munster. However, later on this changes hands again, and that's during what's called the Irish Confederacy Wars. So that's the Irish end of the War of the Three Kingdoms, or the English Civil War is what it used to be called. And that particular war was very brutal in Ireland. About 200,000 people are thought to have died. The population was about 1.5 million of that. And in a single year during the war, it's thought that 1% of the male population were killed. But anyway, that war ends with the land being transferred yet again. That's the Cromwellian period, and it's that transfer that results in the Castlemaine estate being built. The other interesting thing about the Castlemaine Harbour area is that during the Napoleonic Wars, the British Army built about 40 kilometres of levees around the harbour area to use what had been bog and salt marsh to grow hemp, because they needed hemp in order to produce sails and rope for the navy in that period. And most of those levees apparently are still intact. So there's still this quite large area of farmland that was created basically by pushing the salt marsh back. But there are also special area of scientific interest. There is also a very extensive area of salt marsh. So we're now heading into what in the post-Norman period was still the Gaelic Irish held part, which is held by the McCarthy Moors, and we saw the castle down at Ballykissane, but they basically retained control of most of South Kerry. I think probably also up to the Confederate War. The Confederate War is interesting because it's that expression of the initial wave of Normans becoming more Irish than the Irish themselves is true in this case, because in this region they took the side of the Irish Catholic Confederacy, and that's the reason that they also ended up losing their lands in the Cromwellian conquest of the country. In any case, we are now coming down towards Inch Beach itself. The road along here, busy enough as you'll see from the traffic. It's also quite narrow. There is no way of avoiding it, basically. The only other road that's going down is on the other side of the peninsula, and as you'll see in a couple of days, if anything, that's even worse from a cycling point of view. There are one or two across the top. We're now passing Foley's Bar here. I stopped there this evening because it's just a little bit up from the campsite. Got a good dinner there for €26. It's also interesting because the owner was telling me that the bar, nice photo of it here, hasn't been touched in 70 years, I think it was, since its last makeover. So it's an actual genuine kind of old school bar. You don't see so many of those around the country unless they are modern remakes and reinterpretations. Here is the campsite on the right at Inch Beach. I'll go back and talk about that in a minute, but just let's have a quick look over at Inch Beach itself. So Inch is about 5.5 kilometres worth of beach. It's extending back towards we started this morning, Glenbeigh. There's two spits basically coming out in a relatively narrow channel between them. You see, one of the things that's curious about it is there's always lots of cars parked on the beach. There is a car park, but it's of limited space and lots of people end up out there. But let's hear about the campsite. My original plan had been to break up wild camping nights with B&B nights. Basically because I like the luxury of having a bed and a shower and all the rest. And generally the gap sometimes between B&B course and camping course is very small. However, this is not true on the Dingle Peninsula. I was looking at B&B prices last night and I couldn't really find anything below 150 quid for one person, and most things were 300. So I am instead at Inch Campsite, which is 15 quid for a cyclist. And it doesn't have quite the comfort, but it has enough. It has a shower, which is the main thing. And also there's a couple of plugs in the kitchen area that I could recharge with, so that was handy. But there you go. So this is the fourth video in a sequence as we follow Eurovelo 1 from Kenmare to Limerick. I reckon there's probably about 8 more I'll be doing. If you haven't already given the channel a subscribe, please do so, and do give this video a thumbs up. Helps me get out to more people. Tomorrow's video we're going to be heading from Inch down towards Dingle, and then I'm also going to do the diversion I did, which isn't that evening. I cycled Sleigh Head. So Sleigh Head's one of the most famous scenic drives in Ireland, but also famous for being a bit, well, it's very narrow, twisty, and can have a lot of cars and coaches on it. So what's it like to cycle? I'm going to give you an idea of that. But if you're thinking of it, TLDR version is do it in the evening or in the early morning like I did, when there's much less traffic. After that, we'll head up the other side of the Dingle Peninsula, and then we'll be heading cross country to reach Limerick City via the Greenway. There's 70 kilometres of Greenway along an old rail line that gets there, and that will be our destination for this particular trip. Hope you've enjoyed the videos. Hope they encourage you to consider taking to the road yourself, and if you do so, I hope someday to see you on the road.